Okay, so we'll have about maybe less than 20 minutes discussions going to the break. And since Professor Nishimoto, who is an international lawyer, has joined this lectures now, so may I ask you to have a first comment or maybe question to Professor Koivurova, or maybe some comments for us to discuss. Thank you, Professor Nishimoto.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to make comments and perhaps present some questions. I think we have a lot to think about. We do have a very difficult situation given the situation in Ukraine, and I think the very difficult issues were amply discussed in the presentation by Professor Koivurova. Since my expertise is in the field of international law, one, I think, very big issue that we have to think about is what is really the fundamental justification or the reason of having to suspend cooperation with Russia in the field of scientific cooperation. And I think this is may seem obvious to some people, but I think this may be something worth exploring. And some people, I think, would say that this is maybe simply a matter of geopolitics affecting science cooperation. It is an example of where maybe high politics affects low politics situation, and the former is given priority over the latter. So I think there was an explanation of how this cooperation within the Arctic context came to be developed. This was obviously linked to the end of the Cold War. But even before that, we did have limited forms of cooperation between Russia and the Western states. We did have limited formal institutional cooperations, maybe like under the Polar Bear Agreement. We also had various scientific initiatives in the Cold War period. But even then, I think compared to then, I think the situation that we have now is maybe even more restrictive, limited cooperation. And I think the question is what justifies that. And coming from the field of international law, I think perhaps the fundamental difference is that the current situation is linked to a violation of a very fundamental norm in the international society. And I think this was touched upon by Professor Koivurova. And so this is, of course, about the prohibition on the use of force. This is about the respecting the territorial integrity of a state. And since the current situation is linked to those fundamental norms, perhaps this is the main reason that the suspension of cooperation with Russia is justified. If that is, if my understanding is correct, and I think this may be open to discussion, if this understanding is correct, I don't think we have to be too pessimistic as a general matter regarding the importance of scientific diplomacy. Because, of course, we can see this as a very exceptional situation. And we can, as a matter of principle, see scientific cooperation, scientific diplomacy as an area where it can have resilience as reflecting its nature as something that fundamentally transcends sort of borders. But I think this is probably open to discussion, so maybe I would like to hear the views of other participants on this viewpoint. And also something related to this is, so what would happen in the long term? What are the long-term consequences of the situation that we have today? And what would signal maybe the end of this most difficult period? If this was tied simply to the violation of fundamental norms, most fundamental norms in international society, even if the geopolitical tensions remain, we may see possibilities for scientific cooperation. If we see this as something more generally about geopolitics, we may have long-lasting effects from the current situation that we have. And I think Professor Enomoto also talked about different forms of scientific cooperation or different forms of science, like in scientist-to-scientist cooperation, or simply monitoring that goes on a daily level, and that there may be different ways to think about the situation in regards to science diplomacy. So I think that, well, listening to all the presentation, and especially that of Professor Koivurova, I thought that was a very fundamental point that might be relevant in thinking about the role of science diplomacy in the context of the present Arctic. So I think that would be my comments and question. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Professor Nishimoto. I think we'll collect some comments and questions from the panelists, and then we'll go back to Timo afterwards. Enomoto Sensei, do you have any comments or questions to the panel, and more specifically to Professor Koivurova? Could you use your mic? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation, and you showed us 3 categories. And then, so overlapping my point, so I'm wondering how is your maybe not included in the 3-point next generations so care, or now we have many students coming from the Russia or the country, and we want some students want to go Russia. So in the previous plan, and in your analysis, you made many big analysis about the Finnish direction or international condition related to Russia. Did you state some educational or outreach perspective, so problem or resolution? That is my question.
Thank you. So we'll cover that also. Ambassador, do you have any comments at this moment? Maybe you can, yes, intervene afterwards. Thank you. So maybe, Timo, maybe briefly, because I think there might be some questions from the audience also. Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps is this on?
Yes.
Yeah. So perhaps just to kind of, so in this report, we acknowledge that we are facing very great uncertainty about the future, and for that reason we also created this kind of scenario analysis of different possible futures. But I guess that it's fair to say that many of us in Finland, at very least, and I think in the western part, we are seeing that problem. Thank you. So we are seeing the problem that we don't really have kind of alternatives for a regime for Russia. So we don't have, Russia does not have any democratic experiences in its past. So if we are thinking about the regime change in Russia, I think that that's perhaps unlikely. So then we will have to think how we are going to live with the Putin Russia for the future as well. And that, I think, is going to be fairly difficult. And that, in my view, and this is not the view of this report, because we created scenarios here, I think that may mean a longer term difficulties, especially with the relations with the Western powers and Russia. At the moment, it's extremely difficult to see any openings, and of course we are all kind of in the midst of this war that we are seeing, and no kind of solution at sight. Just a general answer. Thanks.
Maybe these youngsters, early career scholars, exchanges, even in these difficult situations.
Yes, I guess that it comes down to an extent similar type of consideration. So what is happening in Russia at the moment is that the Putin regime is getting more and more kind of control over all the regions and all the sectors of the Russian society, especially now when there were a lot of people exiting Russia. So it means that it's kind of more kind of controlled by Russia, and all the institutions are expected to behave along the way. I mean, the whole idea of us cooperating with Russia before this happened was that we were thinking that we were cooperating with this or that region, or we were cooperating with this and that university, which has not much, not many dealings with the Putin regime and its values. But now the situation is different, because we are really seeing that these institutions have to behave in a certain way, and that makes it much more difficult also for early career students. So I probably didn't kind of say it kind of forcefully in my presentation, but what is happening in Finland is a very strong orientation to the Western Arctic research away from Russia. There are some scholars who are continuing, as I demonstrated, Russian Arctic research, but the general kind of tendency is to look to the West. And of course, this is also related to Finland and Sweden becoming NATO members, and the kind of transatlantic alliance getting deeper.
All right, thank you. So maybe any comments or questions from the audience, both online. I am seeing the online participants also, the registered participants, and also the registered G6 students here at the venue. Any comments you might want to ask? The online participant, you can unmute yourself. Please, thank you, Professor Enomoto.
So the document is very recently summarized. In August, when did you completed this document, this report? I think very new.
Do you want?
Yeah, that's the report.
The main contents of this.
No, yeah. When that is completed, I think that is very much updated information.
Yeah. So this is a report that we did in four months and released at the beginning of October in Helsinki.
So it means very updated information, I think. The most updated information about the analysis, Russia and action and other countries' reaction. And after the Ukraine, Russian invasion to the Ukraine, so many countries or many organizations made a statement in March or April. So many statements came in March. And after that, already more than half a year passed. The statement is maybe not same in the situation. In March, Russian Academy of Science state the Russian scientists want to continue the international framework. And that is maybe expectation of the Russian scientists at that time. And I'm not sure they are still same mind or not. And EU also state, EU statement is also, I don't remember, it's 21st of March. They state many limitations with Russia. It's a prohibition of many parts. And that there is a 9 or 10 control. But final statement, final issue is we should to keep engagement with Russia. Some part. It's human rights and WHO also health control, for example, COVID-19, and also climatic change. And how is idea of the EU? Do you know the current idea?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty much the similar way that. Thank you for the question. Pretty much similar than what Finland and Norway are doing. Like the most immediate issue areas that you have to cooperate, but we have to also look at the big picture. So basically, most of the Western companies have evacuated themselves out of Russia. So there are kind of heavy-duty sanctions now, like not anymore buying Russian gas, oil. I mean, these as kind of targets for the future. These are the big picture kind of issues. And I'm pretty sure that, as I was saying, that it's exactly science that could be as it was at the end days of the Cold War. It was the first one to open up a kind of Arctic cooperation. And as I said, like I didn't explain the Arctic Council situation very much, but there is still, I think, a very viable possibility that this Arctic Council will continue with Russia acting as some kind of silent partner, perhaps. But at least the insiders in the Arctic Council, they seem to feel that this is something that can take place. So those specific issues that you mentioned, I think that the selective engagement is gone. So all these horizons and development programs all are halted. So millions and millions and millions of euros that flooded to Russia, they have totally kind of come to a halt. But then there are certain small areas where there can be some type of small cooperation. But I have to be honest, I mean, especially from the viewpoint of the European Union, it has taken a very strict stance. Because after the 2014, the Crimean annexation, East Ukraine war, and after that, EU continued the selective engagement, even if it had sanctions. There was such a huge disillusionment after the full-scale attack on Ukraine, especially from the European Union, USA, and the whole Western Bloc, I would say. That there are certain small areas where we can still, but I wouldn't call it selective engagement because it's so small areas. Because still, selective engagement was fairly large scale. There was a lot of money flowing into Russia. And much of it was also, I think we have to remember that much of it was also because of our own interest. Finland, for instance, is doing its best possible environmental and climate policy by funding those Russian kind of factories and industrial installations to make them more greener. So this is our best environmental policy and climate policy. This was our own interest. But at the moment, even this is not possible. It's just a full stop, and I think that it will continue until there is some kind of I wouldn't call it even a solution to the conflict or war, but some kind of frozening of the situation, that there are certain space for doing something.
Okay, I think we are now going over the time. Ambassador, would you like to have some comments on?
No, I don't think so.
Okay,
I think
thank you. Then we have two. I think they are from online. From Professor Alexander Sergunin. I think he's in Russia, in Alaska now. And there's one question from Mr. Professor Chen from China. Professor Sergunin says, is real Arctic studies possible if science cooperation with Russia is suspended? That's the real science and international cooperation frameworks. I think he's asking that. And the Professor Chen is asking, what is your view on Chinese contribution to the Arctic science, especially in this context?
Can you repeat the first one?
Yes. Is real Arctic studies, especially in natural sciences, possible if science cooperation with Russia is suspended? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and that's why We see our researchers who've been working there for ages trying to continue this. So I would say that some kind of Arctic research is possible, but it's certainly going to be diminished in importance, and that's why I think that the science leaders are for looking around the corner and looking for ways how to kind of resume science cooperation. It certainly is. It came very clearly from the interviews that we did. So I would say that it's not. So that would be my simple answer. The Chinese question, very interesting, both of these. So we did a study also to our government on China's policy and presence in the Arctic. We did not find that Chinese presence was all that much, even if US was already at that time, especially during the Trump administration, they were very much barking at the kind of overall presence of China being too heavy. We were with a group of many China experts and many Arctic experts. We were concluding that Chinese presence is mostly visible in terms of its science, and I think that that's pretty much where we are still. So its economic importance is not very grand. It's mainly in Russia, in some other countries, meager. But I would say that especially the science importance has been fairly strong. The difficulty, as I also mentioned, is that now when Finland and Sweden likely become members of NATO, also the kind of the portrayal of reality from the part of the US, what China is doing in the Arctic region, will become also something that we have to accept in NATO countries. So we are becoming more and more suspicious whatever China is doing, whether that's called science, it doesn't matter. So that's also a reality of kind of geopolitics. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you for the panelists and also Professor Koivurova. Thank you. So this concludes the first part of the today's seminar. And could you stop the recording, please? Thank you. All right. 日本語で、少し時間が押してますので、休憩を40分まで延長しますので、3時40分から1時間、残りの1時間を日本語でのパネルディスカッションにしたいと思います。オンラインで参加されている方々も、40分から日本語でのパネルディスカッションを再開します。ティモ先生はもうここでお帰りになりますので、よろしくお願いいたします。はい。それでは休憩に入ります。ありがとうございました。Thank you.